As Blumhouse's first wholly original franchise, there's always a sense of homecoming when we get a new Insidious movie. And after 2 prequel chapters which diverted attention to Lin Shaye's medium Elise, that feeling permeates Insidious: The Red Door. Patrick Wilson returns to the series as both an actor and a first-time director, and refocuses the action on the Lambert family, whose journeys into the atmospheric netherworld of the Further have left their strength as a unit broken. Coming full circle back to the Lamberts and pushing those characters to reckon with the effect the first 2 films had on them provides The Red Door with fertile ground to stage a headier, if less terrifying, take on those bedrock Blumhouse movies.
The further you travel, the riskier the journey becomes.
The Red Door picks up 9 years after the Lambert haunting with a slightly altered version of Chapter 2's ending. Father and son astral projectors Josh and Dalton elect to have their memories of the first 2 movies and of their abilities wiped in an effort to prevent the hungry entities of the Further from coming to take their bodies. But the blissful ignorance of that fade to white happy ending was short-lived. Though Josh and Dalton can't remember specifics, the psychological scarring of the lipstick-faced demon's attacks fractured the family, with Josh in particular being unable to express himself in the midst of a worsening brain fog. Dalton is similarly haunted, but a passion for art, which is kind of a cute nod to his drawings from the first movie, seems to have kept him on the rails. A death in the family and Dalton's simultaneous departure for college puts great strain on the Lamberts, and this time of transition represents a chance for the entities of the Further to attempt a crossover into the living world once again. In his directorial debut, Patrick Wilson strikes a franchise-best balance between family melodrama and how Insidious's supernatural elements illustrate it. The Further has always been a charmingly lo-fi horror locale, but The Red Door feels like the first time it, and the entities which call it home, have been effectively used as microcosm for the character arcs being pushed along. Dalton's art teacher, whose name is not Lydia Art, but it definitely should be, encourages him to sink further into his subconscious as he works on his big project for the semester, a painting of a red door he's seeing in his nightmares. Yes, the very same red door from the first movie. As these trance-like sessions bring secrets about his connection to the spirit world bubbling to the surface, both Dalton's relationship with Josh and the appetite of the restless spirits become more severe. This shared sins of the father storyline and journey towards reconciliation is a simple but solid thematic base to root the evil entity's hunger in, and is lent weight by Patrick Wilson and Ty Simpkins' earnest performances. As Dalton, Simpkins in particular has to walk a fine line between the predictable angst of an 18-year-old and the genuine and warranted suspicion with which he has to treat Wilson's Josh. By and large, Simpkins strikes this balance pretty well and maintains a measure of vulnerability for a character who easily could have fallen into the broody art kid archetype. This very much calls to mind like your Anakin Skywalkers in Attack of the Clones or Harry Potter in Order of the Phoenix. There was definitely a concern there that Dalton could have felt like this tortured art student who's haunted by the Further entities. But Simpkins is pretty likable throughout the entire movie, even when playing that darkness. And I have to imagine that comes down to Patrick Wilson's ability to direct other actors. That's something that we see a lot when actors direct other actors. They're able to sort of keep that dynamic, that character at the focus of what they're doing, and Simpkins really kind of has that in focus through the whole movie. Josh is on a somewhat parallel track to Dalton in putting his demons to bed. Haunted by Further entities as a child himself, Josh has always struggled to engage with the spectral attacks on his family head on, but his tendency to push through things without talking about them has fully caught up with him here. Compared to the boisterous family man of the first 2 movies, Wilson plays Josh as a harried husk in The Red Door, and shines in the moments where his character's barely holding it together. With how much of a focus that Insidious: The Red Door puts on that relationship between Josh and Dalton, it almost makes you wish that they had only brought Patrick Wilson and Ty Simpkins back. Rose Byrne and Andrew Astor, the actors that play Renee and Foster, it's great to have them back. It's great to have the entire Lambert family back as a piece, just in terms of, reuniting that classic cast. We always love to see that, right? The thing is, though, is that you want that to have some sort of weight to the story. It needs to have some sort of reason for happening. And whereas Insidious: The Red Door's main thrust is that tension between Dalton and Josh, there's really nothing for the other family members to play against, and so those scenes just really, really grind things to a halt whenever they happen. So time spent with Ty Simpkins and Patrick Wilson, there's always something interesting going on between those characters. Anytime we're talking to the family members, I checked out a little bit. I closed the red door a little bit. I opened it when Patrick Wilson and Ty Simpkins were there. I was like, hey, what's up? What are you guys talking about? But when Foster and Renee were talking, I was like, close that door a little bit. You know? As director, Wilson's horror chops are at their most effective during the Red Door's luxurious long takes, and he's able to sustain significant stretches of dread around that strength. For as famous as the Insidious films are for their jump scares, and we will get to those, they're usually at their best and most creative in the build-up to those moments, forcing us to stop trusting the corners of our eyes. The writing is on the wall for Josh as soon as he agrees to go into an MRI machine, which, hey, claustrophobes, great time for a pee break. But Wilson uses smart edits and escalating panic in his own performance to turn that screw for as long as is sustainable before paying off that punchline. Wilson pushes this sensibility during daylight scares too, which are always the hardest thing to do in horror movies, with one early appearance of a spirit playing out in a single take that goes on for what feels like a full minute, reestablishing that creepy, creeping tone that has always been a calling card for this series. Being involved with the franchise since the beginning and a frequent collaborator of James Wan's to boot, it shouldn't be much of a surprise that Wilson is so attuned to the hallmarks of the Insidious movies, but his ability to execute on them so confidently gives the Red Door an identity consistent with what Wan did in Insidious and Insidious Chapter 2, while better illuminating the drama. Of course, these marathon dread-filled rides up to the top of the roller coaster often pay off with cacophonous outbursts of demonic rage or ghostly malcontent, punctuated by discordant string hits, and the potency of those moments is one area where the Red Door does suffer from the law of diminishing returns. There are a glut of jump scares throughout this movie, and not always as the result of minutes of carefully layered tension and misdirection. Now look, on a visceral level, jump scares work, and there is an ugly scratch across the review notes for this movie to prove it. I actually, while I was writing the review, went like this when something scared me. I can't remember what it was because there's so many jump scares in this movie, and that's kind of part of the problem. They all start to mix together a little bit. There's nothing so iconic as that moment in the first Insidious movie where Patrick Wilson's at the table and that red, scary, the lipstick-faced demon pops up behind him in there. Why does that moment work so well? It's because there is this long scene of Josh's mom explaining this nightmare that she had. We're cutting in and out of that, and we're cutting back and forth to the table where we're supposedly safe in reality. That's a really, really intelligently built scene. That's one of the most iconic scares, not even just of the Insidious movies, but of the last 20 years in horror movies. There's nothing quite so creative in The Red Door. That MRI scene that I mentioned might just approach some of what the best of the Insidious franchise is able to do, but scant few of the Red Door's attempts at frightening you feel like they're iterating or innovating in a substantial way.
Dr. Brower?
While Wilson has no problem mining the Lambert family drama for interpersonal conflict, The Red Door's college setting feels comparatively nondescript. Though we get spooky moments in expected arenas, a classroom, a dorm room, a frat house, little of that activity feels specifically tied to Dalton's college experience, and so doesn't connect as cleanly as the family-themed horror does. With images of alcohol-poisoned ghost kids crawling after Dalton, maybe ones who had upbringings as affecting as his, The Red Door hints at more complex avenues it could have explored using its college trappings, a more frank look at how Dalton relates to these kids who've died in tragedy. It seems that thread would have required one less Lambert to really home in on. A new setting does mean a new opportunity to explain old information, and Dalton's roommate Chris serves as a refreshingly down-to-earth foil in that role. How quickly Chris is willing to accept Dalton's astral powers and the resultant paranormal activity calls to mind the bumbling ghost hunters Specs and Tucker. And with Dalton now the relative expert on the subject, Chris's matter-of-fact reactions and willingness to roll with the punches for her new friend provide the Red Door with a reliable levity when needed.
Something is following us.
I'm gonna need you to remain still
Even if it starts to rely too heavily on surface-level startles, Insidious the Red Door is a satisfying conclusion to the Lambert family's long nightmare journey into the Further. First-time director Patrick Wilson grounds the Red Door's drama in simple stakes, a son trying to forgive his father. And the film is at its best when focusing on that dynamic. Though the supporting cast and college setting could have used more attention, The Red Door wears its heart on its sleeve and generates enough dread in the quiet moments to sustain it through the less effective jump scares. Thanks for watching. For more reviews, check out what we thought of The Flash and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and as always, be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you like to watch IGN.
Hello? Hello?